hear just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly.
Wow.
In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today we are pleased and honored to have as our guest Mr. Jeffrey Tucker. He's a director of digital development for the Foundation of Economic Education, an organization that my wife and I financially support, and the Chief Liberty Officer for Liberty May, another organization that we support, that's a global liberty community of which, of course, my wife and I, I guess we're card-carrying members, although we don't have any card. Today we'll start our dialogue with him. He's a returning guest, and we'll be talking about the Paris Accord and Trump as a populist, and see where that takes us. Jeffrey, thank you very much for being on our show again.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciated your introduction. It's kind of refreshing to hear people name the enemy, which is government. These days we live in strange times where the left and right wants to talk about everything except the real problem, Right. And it gets frustrating for us as libertarians because we know that society would manage itself just fine if government would leave everything alone, stop the pillaging, stop the manipulation, and stop the interventions. And we recognize that that's the core problem we face. But in many ways, we're alone. And we're faced with people, the left and right, who are trying to distract us from this core truth.
Yeah. I was watching just the very tail end summary of the Comey investigation, and they had dialogue after dialogue after dialogue. Everyone had their opinions and whatever. I learned nothing. So I turned on RTV, Russian television, America. And they spoke somewhat of it. They were more succinct. Of course, they were American journalists that were giving the dialogue. The more succinct. I understood better what they were trying to get at. But right after that, they showed pictures of our second bombing this week of Syria. And they showed a whole bunch of jet planes, going over there bombing Syria. And I thought to myself, isn't it interesting that you get the bombing of Syria back to back with the Comey investigation, and on our regular television, you don't get anything about the bombing. You just get the Comey investigation. Yeah. And we block out news that we don't want people to hear, and thus when someone brings it up, we say, well, we have to protect ourselves against the Russians or whatever. And this just happened about an hour ago or so, maybe an hour and a half ago, and it just infuriated me.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, it's such a problem. Americans remain largely ignorant of U.S. foreign policy because we're not told about it. I mean, the news is there, but you have to turn to the international section of the New York Times and really be, a fanatic for these things to learn about it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any idea that the U.S. is bombing every day in Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq. And the other day when the Iranian parliament was raided by the ISIS terrorists, it was strange for the American radio pundits to talk about this because the question is, wait a minute, we're always hearing that Iran is a terrorist state and that the main terrorists in the Middle East are ISIS. But now you have ISIS attacking the Iranian parliament. How do you make sense of that? Well, the announcers had a difficult time explaining it, actually, and really comes down to the fact that ISIS is largely Sunni fanatics and Iran is a Shiite regime, but it gets so complex because our allies in that region, our alliances are constantly shifting. Yeah. And our priorities are constantly shifting. I mean, it's really so bizarre, I mean, like you had Trump the other day going to Saudi Arabia and being all obsequious and deferential and everything to a regime that on any other day of the week, everybody knows is actually a very dangerous supporter of the very Islamic extremism that we're supposed to be fighting against, right. And of course, God knows Syrian politics is just out of control with its complexity. We're supposedly supporting good guys there, but nobody knows who they are, Are we supporting the regime against the bad guys, or the bad guys against the regime and calling them good guys? I mean, so people wonder, what the problem is with terrorism around the world. You need to look carefully at American foreign policy, and not just recent. It goes back a quarter of a century, essentially dating to the very first intervention in Iraq.
I had an intelligence officer just the other day on the program, and he is mostly anti-intervention, but not 100%. I said, well, why are we worrying about what's happening in some city that I'll be honest with you, I couldn't find on a map if my life depended on it, but Camden, New Jersey has been taken over by warlords, and we don't hear a word about it. In fact, the police have abdicated, the streets to the warlords because they don't have enough money to patrol the streets, and they've given up even patrolling the area. Detroit's gone that way. Chicago is now bankrupt. And I said, beyond that, the entire country, we're bankrupt. We are going in the hole at over $12,000 per second. We increase our debt over 12,000. That's my calculation, by the way. I could be wrong, but not probably too far wrong. And yet no one wants to talk about it. It's like having the crazy aunt in the closet, in the back room. You never talk about it. She lives there, but you don't want to talk about her. And we refuse to accept reality. There's all this reality around us that's telling us, stop doing what you're doing. You're nuts. Don't you know where this is leading you? But we want to ignore that, and we just want to take selective parts of the news to make us feel better. And
it's all consumed by partisan politics. It's like, who's the good guy? Who are the good guys and bad guys here at home? But really, what people need to recognize is that you really do have two flavors of the same regime, and we keep trading back and forth between the two. And what we really need is that old idea of just liberty itself, and that's just not what anybody wants to talk about. Yeah, well, tragically,
especially when it comes to healthcare. Now we're going to get on the Paris Accord in a second.
Topic, that's an outrage because here it is. Now we're talking about mid-June, right? The Republicans were elected. You could argue that the main reason that Trump and the Republicans took the Congress and the Senate was to do something about the Obamacare problem, which was a disaster. 2 years ago when the thing went into 2 or 3 years ago, whenever it was, went into effect, people's premiums just went through the roof. The deductibles, their access to health care was seriously constrained. And anybody could have predicted this. Obamacare was badly constructed in the first place because it disabled market competition. And it was basically a government-managed healthcare plan, and like a big surprise that didn't work. So the Republicans promised, for months and months and really years to repeal all this mess and get something like, maybe, the previous system, which would have been an improvement over Obamacare, but ideally an actual real market in healthcare, so we could have the same access to healthcare that we have to every other product, consumer, whether it's computers or tennis shoes or groceries, right? But instead, now it is summer and nothing has happened. And the only bill the House has passed you could say that it doesn't do anything. Maybe it makes a tiny improvement, but, even that's questionable. And the Senate hasn't acted at all. And I'm getting the impression that the Republicans just don't want to touch it. So they're going to wipe that they're going to sweep that under the carpet. And then the promise of tax reform. I mean, come on. That's not even on the table. There is no tax bill. Nobody's talking about it. And instead, we're bombing all these foreign countries all the time, and now consumed with this endless, inside D.C., inside the Beltway politics over this so-called Russian meddling, which nobody even knows if there's anything to that or not.
Oh yeah.
But now you've got Capitol Hill just consumed with these hearings, which are really not even about that as such. They're really about what kind of obstruction of justice may or may not have occurred in the course of, enabling or preventing investigations into the problem. So essentially what's happened is American politics is just sort of collapsing in on itself, really. It's not doing anything other than just trying to distract us from the real problem and permit the Republicans out so they don't have to do what they promised they were supposed to do. And you wonder why people are cynical about politics. This is why people are cynical about politics.
Well, when Obama was in office, the Republicans put a package together, proposal, to do away with the Affordable Care Act altogether, right? But they did that because they knew Obama wasn't going to pass it, right?
That's right.
So they came out as here and said, well, we try to get rid of it, get back to a free market system. But then when they got their man in office, all of a sudden they didn't resubmit that same package. They came up with their own version of Obamacare, which is probably just as bad. I don't know what the ins and outs, but when it's a couple of 100 pages long, I'm sure I wouldn't understand any of it. And of course, and that doesn't even pass. Now they're going to have a convoluted version of it, and those people who study this say it's going to be worse than the Affordable Care Act. It's going to be more expensive.
You're right.
Why don't they have any scruples? Don't they have any morals at all? No morals at all.
And Republicans are very courageous when they're out of power.
Oh yeah,
and then when they get power, suddenly they're all about just preserving the status quo. They become extremely cautious and afraid to do anything. Honestly, this is a true tragedy, but I don't think we're going to see any action on healthcare anytime in the coming years. We're stuck with the system as it currently exists. The most we can hope for is that we'll make a circuitous route around the regulations and continue to develop a private healthcare system, that exists on a cash-only basis or on a subscription basis or something like that. But it's very difficult, and guess who suffers the most? It's the middle class and the poor.
Yeah,
the rich,
absolutely.
The rich always have access. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I don't know why they don't use the word. Listen, we're a socialist government. We believe in socialized medicine. You got it. This is what socialism does for you. Now like it. Why don't they say that? The Republicans should say that. They never use the word socialism. They talk about government-assisted health care. They don't say this is a socialist program. We don't want the free market. The free market was for a free America. You're not free anymore. Now you are subjects of the government. Why don't they say what it is?
That's right, and this is exactly what the Affordable Care Act did. It disabled competition in many ways, making it impossible for people to choose a kind of package that they want at a price that they can afford, making it possible for people to enter and exit the healthcare sector, and for those new entrants to be able to select among their customer base so they can allocate the risk pools in a way that makes sense. So they disabled all these things with so many mandates and requirements. It might as well be a socialist system, and we're surprised that it doesn't work. The one thing you've learned, I think we should have learned over a century of experimentation, is that there's no substitute for market competition. No substitute for the price system, for commerce, and for profit and loss is the driving force of enterprise. And anytime you have mandates that disable that stuff, you're going to get explosions in prices, a stagnant sector, lack of innovation, or lack of access, and a complete absence of progress. In fact, you're going to get regress. That's exactly what we got.
Right, exactly, yeah. And they want to call this Health Care Act insurance. It's not insurance. It doesn't resemble insurance. Insurance is when you pay in for a possible unexpected occurrence in the future, and everyone contributes according to what they want covered. And if it occurs, either it's paid for or they participate in paying for it, and both sides are winners, and there's competition for that money, thus lowering the price. Everything that this Affordable Care Act and now the American Care, whatever they call it, the new package, whatever they call it, is the exact antithesis of that. All it is taking money from one person and giving it to another, and there is never enough, especially when the system itself is bankrupt to start off with.
Well, and there, and part of the problem, honestly, it really does trace to Trump, because despite his braggadocio and everything, he insisted that whatever package came out of Congress preserved what he called the pre-existing condition mandate. Well, that pre-existing condition mandate consists of three separate, huge government interventions that control the type of package, the kinds of prices that are available, and whether or not a person can be declined at all. So once you give that up, then you're basically talking about Obamacare. So
right. Exactly.
He put the Republicans in a very difficult situation, not that they didn't welcome it, actually knowing the way they are, but it made it impossible to actually pass anything like a decent reform. And it's not even clear to me that Trump even understood the implications of his language. But it's just been devastating. You know who's been really good on this whole thing is Rand Paul.
Right, Rand Paul is the only one, right?
Yeah. And you notice that he's not on the Senate committee that's putting together he's not among the 13 that are chosen to write the bill.
Oh, heavens to Betsy doll if he was. Talking about putting a monkey wrench in the gears.
So here you have a guy he's a trained medical doctor, a complete expert, who's written huge articles and given many, many speeches on the topic. His father is a physician. I mean, he knows this sector extremely well, better than anybody else in the Senate probably. And of course, he's excluded from the committee. He's not even allowed anywhere near them. That tells you all you need to know about what the Senate is intending on this topic. Yeah. So you want to get mad at the Republicans. This is a good basis for it's a good reason to get really upset with them. It's an outrage, really. Yeah. And that, like I said, that doesn't even get us to the topic of tax cuts, which is something else that we're desperate for. We need cuts in business taxes and we need capital gains tax cuts. And until those happen, we're never going to see anything like a return of robust economic growth. And Americans today are suffering for lack of growth. And it's because we have some of the highest business and capital gains taxes in the world.
Right.
It's an embarrassment to me as an American to see how far behind we have fallen relative to the rest of the world. I mean, to Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, and even Great Britain. It's unbelievable. Here's another example. The other day, Trump announced privatization of the air traffic control, which is not real privatization. They're just going to separate it off from control by the FAA and create a separate government-run nonprofit. Okay, fine. That's probably an improvement. But guess what? 50 other nations have already done this. Already done it. The U.S. is so far behind. This should have been done 20, 30 years ago. And we're just now getting around to it, and it's not even sure that that's going to happen. So, I mean, the political gridlock in this country, it's like the entire system is unable to function, even at a 21st century level. I mean, the U.S. is falling so far behind in every area. It's horrible, and it's affecting our lives. I mean, this is the reason people feel themselves stuck in their current job, why their incomes are not rising, why we're not getting a new access to opportunities, why people are afraid for the future of their children, why people are afraid to go to the doctor, for fear of suddenly facing bills they can't pay. People are really angry about it, and the reason is the government. Yeah. It's not what the left says. It's not inequality as such. It's lack of opportunity, and it's not as the right says. It's not because of invasions from foreigners from abroad. That's not our problem. The problem is our lives are being excessively invaded by government controls that are very old-fashioned, unworkable. They belong to the 20th century if they belong anywhere at all. We have got to change, and we've got to change now. And unfortunately, the two-party system is completely broken, and it seems unable to respond to it.
Yeah. Well, it's, I guess, one party, because really the ideology is the same. They just pick and choose so that they can win an election. They can't agree with the other side because they can't garner any votes that way. So I guess it's a political game that they play, and we're the pawns, and we go around voting for them.
There's a lot of cultural signaling that goes on, the Republicans, parade around like they're sympathetic to the Christian bourgeoisie and so on. And then the Democrats, talk vaguely about minorities and blah, blah, blah. But really, it's all just a veneer. It's like
veneer's a good word.
Yeah. That they can conduct every 2 to 4 years, and then just hope that there's enough people alive that are willing to buy into this blather to come to the polls and vote.
And when you mentioned the corporate income tax, people say, well, so many people I've spoken to said, well, we can't take that away. Those corporations are making too much money. I go, they don't pay the tax. I mean, since it's standard throughout the United States, our prices, the prices of everything that you buy, is increased by that amount. You are paying the tax, not them. They make money on the tax. They don't lose money on the tax. I said, so you gain on it, and they cannot see their way through it. They say, oh no, the companies are paying it. No, they raise the prices by 15% or 20% or 25%.
Yeah, no,
they pay it, and they collect it, and then they give it to the government. They said, here, they're a collection agency for the government.
Yeah, that's right. And they do this instead of hiring new employees.
Right.
Instead of opening up new branches, pursuing new lines of production, expanding out their businesses to provide new jobs, new products, and new opportunities, revitalizing our communities and so on. Instead, all the money that would be going to causing economic growth and therefore bettering our lives is instead being channeled straight to Washington, D.C. to continue to fund this ever-growing apparatus of oppression that's not helping anybody. So, yeah, you and I are paying it in so many ways. It's not just the prices that we're paying.
That's right.
It's the jobs that are not being created. It's the new branches of production that we're not seeing. It's the new stores that are not opening up. The new products that we're not being given access to. We're missing out on so much prosperity. And you can see this in your own town. I mean, just look around. You're going to find 1 or 2 businesses out there that seem to be thriving. And, I mean, it's tough. Business is always tough. But they're doing okay. And go to the owner and say, why don't you open up? You're doing okay. Why don't you open up across town? They'll say, well, look, my margins are really thin. And that's a big risk for me to take. I just am not prepared to take that risk. Well, what if you didn't have to pay your cap gains tax? What if your corporate business tax fell from 35 to 10%? All right, and watch the lights in his head. Would you change your mind? And he will tell you, that could make a big difference.
Right.
That would make it a little safer for me to expand my production lines and maybe hire some new people and get a little more enterprise and a little more creative. So that's the difference it makes.
Yeah.
And it matters and you can find this out by talking to any business owner in your hometown.
When I speak to people about eliminating minimum wage, I mean, they go into near, some faint, some go into shock. And I go, but then I can hire anyone I want for any particular job. If people really want to learn a trade or learn learn to work and earn at least some money rather than be on public assistance or living in their parents' basement, I said, at least it gives them an opportunity to learn and to build something. They go, oh no, that would be cruel. You'd be paying people, coolie wages. I go, all right, look at the alternative. We have a high minimum wage here in the United States. So we become unproductive. So not only don't I hire anyone, but I close down my factory altogether and I move it to China or Vietnam or Thailand, right? Now there's nothing here. And now if you want to buy that product, you have to buy it from someone overseas. Which would you prefer? And there's never an answer to that. You never hear an answer.
No, that's right. And I tell you what, it really matters right now because, we're coming up to the summer months, or actually we're in the middle of them now. And this is the time when young people are out trying to, used to in the old days, they'd always get jobs. I mean, you can't believe it, but 30 years ago, about 70 to 75% of teenagers got summer jobs,
right.
Yeah. Now, it's falling. We've never seen as few teenagers getting summer jobs as we see today. It's approaching closer to 40% now, if we're lucky, and it's falling from there. Because when kids don't see their friends getting jobs, then they decide not to get jobs either. And a major factor here is precisely the minimum wage, because the bar to get in is so high. And then you've got, of course, crazy restrictions on employment. You're not really even free in this country to work with the hours that you want to work until you're about 18. I mean, it's just nuts. I mean, there are exceptions for 17 and 16, but they're getting so severe that it's not worth it for people anymore. So as a result, people don't get summer jobs, so they don't get any work experience.
Right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's terrible. And then they graduate from college at 22 without having any knowledge of what it's like to have a job. And, big surprise, they suck at their first job.
Yeah. Well, my first job, my pay was zero. The guy says, I have no money to pay you. I said, I don't want pay. I just want to work here. Hey, look, there's a camera store. I'm not kidding. On Castle Hill Avenue in the Bronx, I remember. I said, I want to work here. I said, I always wanted to work in a camera store. Didn't even live in the neighborhood, by the way, but it was on a train stop going to where I lived. And I had stopped in there once, and I said, what a neat store. I love these cameras, And I worked there for some time, and on Saturday night, he used to give me some money. I used to go out and, take a girl on a date or, go out with my friends, go to movies or anything like that. But I did it for free, and I didn't know if it was illegal or legal or whatever, but I learned something. I mean, he gained by it. I gained by it. We were both happy. No arguments, no restrictions. It worked out great, and I always worked. I worked since really basically a freshman, a sophomore in high school. I've been working.
Yeah, that's an awesome way to do it. Most people aren't willing to do that anymore, and it's not even. It's unclear exactly whether that's even allowed anymore, because the Department of Labor really frowns on businesses that bring in workers at zero wage. They could get in trouble with the Department of Labor for something like that. But if it's ever an opportunity, then people should do it. It's great that you brought this up. When I was like even 11 and 12, I found opportunities to work. And kind of like with you, I never negotiated a salary ahead of time. I just hoped at the end of the day that the guy would pay me. And I did things like, and sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't, but I always enjoyed myself, right?
Right.
But I did things like I dug water wells, I moved fences, I did roofing, I did organ tuning, piano moving, just any kind of thing. I ran cosmetics products for a cosmetics wholesaler, up and down to strip malls. I mean, just every kind of job. And the guy would throw me $10 at the end of the day, or and I was grateful for it. Or maybe it was 50 cents. I enjoyed it. But these days it's much more difficult for young people to find those kinds of jobs. Because the Department of Labor is so severe, in its enforcement. The law hasn't changed that much, but the enforcement is much tighter now, and business people are afraid to hire young people without a labor contract, without going to the W-2 employment stuff and stuff like that. And I tell you, it's even the case that when I turned 15, I went out and got my first real job, right? I mean, like at a department store working, I was doing... after hours cleaning, and that sort of thing, breaking down boxes and cleaning dressing rooms and cleaning bathrooms and that kind of thing. And they said, how old are you? And I said, well, I'm 16. And they just believed me, right? And hired me. Okay, I was lying, but they hired me. But nowadays you would never get away with that. It was in those days it just wasn't a problem. And I am honestly so grateful for every bit of working experience. As I look back at the course of my life, there's two things that it is. You sit in class and listen to some guy yammering at you, or whatever. Okay, that's called school, but that doesn't actually have that much of an impact on your life. Work, on the other hand, is tremendously exciting. You get, massive experiences of all sorts of. I have endless stories to tell about my work life. From the age of 11 or 12 all the way up to before I got my first real job at 25 or whatever. I have so many wonderful, beautiful, fun things to think about. Things that shaped my character and my outlook on life. Gave me weird skills. It taught me how, what the relationship is between business and customers, how to obey a boss, when to quit, what a bad boss is like, what a good boss is like. I have so many stories, so many experiences. What would I do without that? I would be a different person. Yeah. And it makes me so sad to think of so many young people today that never will have this opportunity.
Yeah. I had, when I was young, I worked in what we would call a sweatshop today. It was a glove manufacturing place. And I worked on a cutting machine. The most dangerous thing in the world. I mean, today they would never make this machine. Your hands were underneath this press, and sharp knives would cut through material, and your hands were constantly manipulating those things. I mean, today everyone would be in jail. Everybody.
Yeah,
I never lost any fingers, though. I was lucky.
What amazes me about that? They say, "Oh, well, these jobs are too dangerous for kids. They have human rights, and we're not going to endanger their lives." But I tell you what, you go out on Friday night to the local stadium and watch those junior high and high school kids crashing into each other out on the football field.
Right.
You've got to tell me that's not dangerous?
That's right. What about the cheerleaders? The cheerleaders, they jump up in the air and some fall, they break their necks, and they're paralyzed for life. But we don't stop that,
No,
go team, go.
That's the kind of danger we tolerate.
Yeah. Well, we invited you on here to discuss the Paris Accord. We got a little sidetracked. Why don't we say a few words about that?
That's a funny event because I think I was one of the few people who paid any attention to this thing when it was passed. Now, we're talking about November 2015, right? And the truth is that you, your friends, and no listeners even care that much about it. But what happened was that all these governments from around the world all got together and they accepted all the conventional paradigms about how the world is overheating thanks to fossil fuels, and let's have an agreement to curb it. And the U.S. agreed to curb its fossil fuel emissions. Now, I want to be careful about my language here because the U.S. didn't actually agree to anything. What happened is a bunch of bureaucrats and diplomats went over there and signed a bunch of papers, to set certain targets. But of course, it's up to the producers in the U.S. to comply with these targets. Not that they're given the technology on how to do it. They're just wild targets. But a major factor here was that these U.S. officials promised to transfer really hundreds of billions of dollars to other governments around the world to make their transition to clean fuels, easier.
So subsidizing them, in other words, subsidizing other countries? What are we getting for it?
No, I mean, I'm telling you, most of the signatories of these countries, the reason everybody signed up was because the U.S. was promising to pay. A lot of poor countries were saying, well, look, we don't have, you're talking about how you've got too much fossil fuels. We would love to have fossil fuels in our country. Right now, we're just desperately poor. We're ready for any kind of energy from whatever source.
Right.
So very, very cleverly in a way, many of the heads of these states said, look, how about this? The U.S., we established a fund, and the U.S. Put in billions of dollars a year for 50 years or whatever, that makes it possible for us to leapfrog over fossil fuels straight from our hunter-gatherer societies into clean energy, and that'll make it possible for us not to contribute to climate change. And so, yeah, that sounds like a good deal to them, I guess, because it's just straight out foreign aid, in other words, right? So the U.S. signs this agreement. I'm reading this in the New York Times, and there's big headlines. Oh, historic agreement in Paris, and they went on for days and days and days about this crap. I got to tell you, no regular person was paying any attention to this nonsense. This is the kind of thing you read in the New York Times that doesn't affect anything else, right? So I think Donald Trump came along, and I think, look, I don't have to tell you that I'm not a fan of him. I'm not. But in this case, he made the right choice.
Right.
He said, look, this agreement is ridiculous. We don't need some global agreement between bureaucrats to manage our transition to clean energy. We're doing just fine ourselves, and nor do we want to be taxing our own citizens in order to transfer hundreds of billions of dollars to people around the world for God knows for what. We don't even know where this money is going to go. His statement pulling out of the agreement was, what I think, really sound. He cited some really solid, reputable research. Like I say, look, it pains me to say anything good about this guy, but in this case, he was right. And and it was amazing. After this, of course, there was an explosion. The mainstream media. Oh no, the U.S. is betraying the climate and has done this disreputable, horrible thing. Donald Trump's like a terrorist or something like that. And I wrote an article about this, and I just said, look, these people have amazing arrogance, the people who threw together this agreement. The idea that a bunch of bureaucrats would sit around Paris, sipping champagne and establishing targets for what the fossil fuel, what emissions are going to be 50 to 100 years from now, and believing that they can draw a direct cause and effect between that and stabilizing global climate. I mean, the level of arrogance and, how should I say, scientific slippage here is awesome to consider, and really just laughable. So I just think it represents a level of absurdity like I've rarely seen in political life. So I totally support the decision to pull out of that. I think that was a smart choice on the part of Trump. Now, he did it probably for cynical reasons, because he knows good and well the average people, like you and me, are going to go, yeah, that's right. So I don't think he's going to pay any political price for having done this at all. I think it's probably going to benefit him politically.
Yeah. But how come we don't hear the other side of the story? We only hear, look what he's done. Everyone's going to die in 5 years from pollution. No one's going to be able to breathe, etc. You hear all these horror stories, and you just get sick of them. But you don't hear the other side. The mainstream media will not put up the other side of the story. Will never puts up the constitutional side of the story. Never talks about the monetary side of the story. Never talks about the fact that it bypassed Congress because there was a taxation on the people by bureaucrats, a bureaucratic agreement with a foreign country. How far away can you get?
I'm glad you brought this up, because, look, we're always hearing about the glories of democracy, right? I mean, everybody's saying, oh, democracy. This is the most undemocratic agreement you can possibly ever even imagine. It was negotiated by a bunch of bureaucrats with a very tiny coalition of government-funded scientists, in coalition with a bunch of other bureaucrats. I mean, never once was Congress asked, the Senate asked, to say nothing of the American people or the producers are going to be responsible for implementing these plans. I mean, this is an outrageous example of top-down central planning with a 50 and 100 year. The Soviets used to talk about 5-year plans, and we used to laugh at it.
Right, they never made it.
You're right. But now we got State Department bureaucrats, and EPA bureaucrats and UN officials making 50 and 100-year plans about the global climate. And we're supposed to take this seriously? I mean, come on. And again, they never talk to Congress. I tell you, if the reason it's called an agreement or an accord rather than a treaty is because they could have never gotten it through the Senate. They would never.
Right.
Never.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you knew nothing other than that, it's a good reason to pull out of it. I mean, to my way of thinking.
Yeah. Where do you think, I'm going to ask you an open focus general question, and that's, where do you think we're heading? I've always been concerned about our political system. I've always been very concerned about where we're going as a country, being a capitalistic country, free market and whatever. But I've never really been afraid. I'll be honest with you. I mean, it's always it upset me, but it's never frightened me. I'm getting frightened
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I feel that. I feel that too. I mean, and one of the reasons I think it's scary is that the answers are not coming to us through conventional politics. I mean, you look like a guy like Trump, who's trying to restore a weird past, through protectionism and all kinds of nativist, saber rattling and all kinds of things. And then you've got the other side, people like Elizabeth Warren, who's advocating, just redistribution and shutting down capitalism as somehow an answer. It gets really scary when you consider these two sides. Yeah. But, I think it's important to look beyond conventional politics. I think that's the best way to think about it. My hope these days is mostly in technology. I'm very excited about things like distributed networks and things like blockchain applications like in Ethereum and Bitcoin, and the opportunities that are alive in the digital realm through the app economy and so on. All these things are growing and developing outside of politics. And I tell you, my actual opinion is that things are going so well in that realm that what's going to happen in the future is that our political institutions are going to get ever more old-fashioned to the point that they just begin to be so stupid and laughable and silly that they will not be able to be sustained in light of all the advances that we're facing. And I mean, we go through this every day. I mean, I don't know how often you have a chance to interact directly with government offices or officials, and we all do it as little as possible. But the other day I had to go to a traffic court over some ticket or something, and it's just funny, how old-fashioned the system is, I sat there all morning long waiting for a judge to come along, moving, shuffling from room to room to room, and they're giving me these papers to fill out, and then I'm supposed to take this paper over to this person. The whole time I'm thinking, look, I know all you want is my money. Why don't you just take my money and leave me alone, right? But instead, no, you have to shuffle along in their bureaucratic systems. Finally, they gave me Form 912, whatever, and they said, you have to go to another building now and turn this in. And I was like, look, I'm really out of time today. Do I have to do this? They said, well, you can do it tomorrow. That's fine. So the next day I got up and went over that bureaucracy. This other bureaucracy, walked in, I had to take a ticket and wait another 4 hours or something like that. I finally got up to the counter with a piece of paper. A piece of paper. Like, why am I holding this stupid thing? Like, why couldn't have one office just notify the other office? No, they can't do that. So I've got to hold a piece of paper, and I present it to the guy. Is this what you wanted? He goes, yeah, this seems to be like the paper we need. And he said, well, we're good. Let me just scan this. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm scanning this piece of paper. So he's got an old-fashioned scanner from like 20 years ago, pushing this paper through the scanner. I'm just like, I can't believe this is happening. The guy's nice guy, But why are we doing this? You know what I mean? It's like you go back in time.
Right.
Any time you encounter the guy. Now, what's it going to be like in 30 years? Are they still going to be operating like it's the 1980s? I don't know. But at some point, the progress we experience every other part of our lives is going to eat away at these old-fashioned systems. The past will, at some point, be past.
Yeah. Well, at least they didn't use Morse code to communicate with the building across the street to tell them you were coming.
It's funny. And, the funny thing is, even the people involved in the system know that it's silly. But they can't do anything about it. It's their job or whatever. Oh, it's just funny. Even the judges, it was so funny. The judge is nice guy. I'm in Atlanta. I love my city, And the judges asked somebody who was on, giving testimony or something like that, and she pleaded nolo contendere or something like this. And he said to her in passing, he goes, now listen, I'm just going to ask you, is there anything that you think that my office or this agency could do to serve you better? A nice question, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a nice question. So the lady says, well, I tell you what would be nice. If I could just go online and get like an appointment and show up at my appointed time, then I wouldn't have had to waste this whole day sitting there, back there in the back of the room. And the judge said, well, hey, we're doing the best we can with what we have, all right? I mean, he got upset at it. He goes, well, we're all working hard, man. We're working harder out here, all right? And so she goes, well, listen, I'm sorry, Your Honor, you asked.
I'm surprised she didn't get 5 to 10, you know. Well, with that, Jeffrey, that was the greatest laugh of the day, maybe the week or the month right now. But I want to thank you so much. I want to give you the last couple of minutes. We have 2 more minutes to go, so I'd like to give you the last couple of minutes to close things up and tell our audience how they may reach you if you'd like, or how they can see what you're doing.
Okay. Well, let me just say this. I think that the way out of our current problem is through education and through ideas. I think that's ultimately going to save the day. And that's why I work for the Foundation for Economic Education. You say you're a supporter. Yes. I appreciate it. We've been around 71 years. I'm proud to be the director of the digital content there. We're pushing out great stuff every day. Go to fee.org, have a look at it, share it. That's the way we get new audiences. Yes. So, and keep your chin up. Let's stay hopeful and always think about freedom as the answer.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on our show. I hope you do accept our invitation to return at a later date.
It'd be my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. And don't forget to subscribe to our reminder service on our website by going to our website and clicking on the subscribe icon. We will not sell your name to anyone. It's just to be reminded of when our next broadcast is. Like us on Facebook and download our app on your smartphone so you can listen to us anytime, 24 hours a day. And with that, we say stay well, stay tuned.